The gunshot tore through Eleanor's back just as she reached for the water bucket outside the boarding house, and in that split second of searing pain, she knew her life would never be the same. It was August 1876 in Deadwood, Dakota Territory, and the town had erupted into chaos after a dispute between two mining crews turned violent. Eleanor Hayes, 23 years old and newly arrived from Boston just 3 months prior, had come west seeking adventure and a fresh start after her father's shipping business collapsed. She had taken work at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, serving meals and keeping rooms for the miners and drifters who flooded into town chasing gold. The work was hard but honest, and Eleanor had begun to find a rhythm in this rough frontier life, so different from the structured society she had left behind. The bullet had not been meant for her. Two men were shooting at each other across the muddy main street, their argument over a mining claim having escalated beyond words. Eleanor had simply been in the wrong place when one man's aim went wild. She remembered the strange punching sensation in her lower back, then falling forward onto the wooden planks of the porch. The water bucket clattered away, spilling its contents across the boards. The pain came a moment later, white-hot and all-consuming, radiating from a point just to the left of her spine. She tried to push herself up, but her legs would not cooperate properly. Panic flooded through her as she realized she could barely move them. She managed to roll onto her side, gasping, and that was when the real agony began. Every tiny movement, every breath, sent lightning bolts of pain through her body. People were screaming and running. More gunshots rang out. Eleanor pressed her face against the rough wood of the porch, trying not to move, trying not to breathe too deeply, trying not to think about the warm wetness spreading across her back. Then there were boots beside her head, scuffed brown leather boots with worn spurs. Someone dropped to their knees next to her. "Ma'am, do not move," a man's voice said, low and urgent. "You have been shot." "I know," Eleanor managed to gasp out. The pain was making her vision blur at the edges. "I am going to look at the wound," the voice continued. "I need you to stay as still as you can." Eleanor felt gentle hands on her back, then heard the man suck in a sharp breath. "It is still in there," he said, though she was not sure if he was speaking to her or to himself. "We need to get you to a surgeon, but moving you is going to hurt like hell." "It already hurts," Eleanor whispered. "I know," the man said, and there was genuine sympathy in his voice. "But it is about to get worse. I am sorry for that." Eleanor wanted to see who was speaking to her, but she could not turn her head without pain shooting down her spine. She heard him calling out to someone, his voice raised. "Get back! Give us room! Someone fetch a blanket!" More boots approached, and she heard Mrs. Patterson's familiar voice. "Oh, Lord, is that Eleanor? Is she alive?" "She is alive," the man said firmly, "but she needs a surgeon fast. That bullet is lodged near her spine." The words sent a new kind of terror through Eleanor. Near her spine. That explained why her legs felt so strange, why every movement was agony. "The nearest real surgeon is in Cheyenne," someone else said. "That is 3 days' ride from here." "Then we leave now," the man beside her said. "Someone get my horse." "You cannot move her," Mrs. Patterson protested. "The journey will kill her. Leaving her here will definitely kill her," the man said, his voice hard. "That bullet needs to come out, and it needs to come out by someone who knows what they are doing. We do not have anyone in Deadwood who can handle something this delicate." Eleanor tried to focus through the pain. 3 days' ride? She could not imagine surviving 3 hours in this condition, let alone 3 days. But she also knew the man was right. Deadwood had grown too fast, and while there were men who could set bones and stitch up knife wounds, an operation near the spine required real surgical skill. "I will make it," she heard herself say, though she had no idea if that was true. "I will try." "That is good," the man said, and she felt his hand rest gently on her shoulder. "I am going to take care of you. My name is James Cartwright. I am going to get you to Cheyenne, and I am going to make sure you survive this ride. Do you understand?" "Yes," Eleanor whispered. What happened next was a blur of pain and motion. James Cartwright organized everything with quiet efficiency. He had someone bring several blankets, which he fashioned into a sort of cushioned carrier. He explained what he was going to do before he did it, his voice steady and calm, even as Eleanor's world dissolved into agony. "I am going to roll you onto the blanket now," he said. "It is going to hurt. I need you to try not to tense up, because that will make it worse. Can you do that?" Eleanor nodded fractionally, then gasped as even that small movement sent pain radiating through her back. James counted to 3, then rolled her as gently as possible onto her stomach on the blanket. Eleanor could not stop the scream that tore from her throat. The pain was beyond anything she had ever imagined. She felt consciousness slipping away and tried to hold on to it, afraid that if she passed out she might never wake up. "Stay with me," James said urgently. "Eleanor, stay with me. The worst part is over." But it was not over. He had to lift her, had to carry her to his horse. Every step he took sent fresh waves of agony through her body. She could feel the bullet shifting with each movement, grinding against bone and nerve. Her vision went white, then gray, then white again. She was aware of being lifted onto a horse, of James mounting behind her. He positioned her carefully across his lap, her body supported against his chest. One of his arms wrapped around her waist, holding her secure. She could feel his heartbeat against her shoulder, steady and strong. "I have got you," he murmured. "I will not let you fall." Then they were moving, and Eleanor discovered that there were depths of pain she had not yet experienced. Every step the horse took jarred her body. The bullet ground against her spine with each movement. She could not stop the small sounds of pain that escaped her throat. "I know," James said softly over and over. "I know it hurts. I am so sorry." He kept the horse at the slowest walk possible, trying to minimize the jarring, but there was no way to make the journey painless. Eleanor existed in a haze of agony, barely aware of the landscape passing around them. The sun beat down mercilessly. Sweat ran down her face. Or maybe it was tears. She could not tell anymore. After what might have been an hour, or might have been days, James pulled the horse to a stop near a stream. "We need to rest for a moment," he said. "I need to check your wound and get some water in you." He dismounted carefully, then lifted Eleanor down with infinite gentleness. Even so, the movement made her cry out. He laid her on her stomach on a blanket he spread beside the stream. "I am going to give you some water," he said. "Small sips." He held a canteen to her lips, and Eleanor drank gratefully. The water was cool and sweet, and for just a moment it distracted her from the pain. "How bad is it?" she asked, her voice hoarse. James was quiet for a long moment. "The bleeding has mostly stopped," he finally said. "That is good. But the bullet is still in there, and every movement risks it doing more damage. I will not lie to you, Eleanor. This is going to be the hardest thing you have ever done. 3 days to Cheyenne, and every mile is going to hurt." "Tell me about yourself," Eleanor said suddenly. "Tell me anything. I need something to think about besides the pain." She felt him shift beside her, heard the surprise in his voice. "You want to talk now?" "Please," Eleanor said. "Just talk to me." James was silent for a moment, then began to speak. "I am 26 years old," he said. "I have been working cattle drives for the past 8 years, ever since my father died and our ranch in Texas went under. I have ridden from Texas to Kansas more times than I can count. I came to Deadwood looking for something different, maybe a mining stake, but I have not found my fortune yet. I have been working odd jobs and trying to save up enough to maybe start over somewhere else." His voice was deep and steady, with the slow drawl of Texas in it. Eleanor focused on the sound, using it as an anchor against the pain. "Are you from Boston?" James asked. "Your accent says East Coast." "Boston," Eleanor confirmed. "My father was a shipping merchant. When his business failed, there was nothing left for me there. I thought the West would be full of opportunity." "It is full of opportunity to get shot, apparently," James said dryly. And despite everything, Eleanor felt a small laugh escape her. The laugh turned into a gasp of pain, but for just a second, she had felt something other than agony. "We should keep moving," James said. "The sooner we get to Cheyenne, the sooner you can get that bullet out." The next hours were a test of endurance. James kept the horse at a steady walk, choosing the smoothest paths he could find. He talked to Eleanor the whole time, his voice a constant presence. He told her about growing up on a ranch, about learning to rope cattle when he was 6 years old, about the first time he rode the entire cattle drive from Texas to Kansas at 18. He talked about the plains in spring when the wildflowers bloomed, about thunderstorms that rolled across the grasslands like ocean waves, about the satisfaction of hard work under an open sky. Eleanor tried to respond, tried to hold up her end of the conversation, but increasingly she could only manage small sounds of acknowledgement. The pain was wearing her down, grinding away at her strength and will. She felt herself drifting, consciousness becoming slippery and unreliable. "Stay awake," James said sharply whenever he felt her start to sag. "Eleanor, stay awake. Talk to me. Tell me about Boston." "Cold," Eleanor mumbled. "So cold in winter, the harbor freezes, but beautiful. The trees in autumn, red and gold." "What else?" James prompted. "What did you do there?" "Went to parties," Eleanor said, the words coming slowly. "Wore fancy dresses, danced, so much dancing. Seemed important then. Seems silly now." "It is not silly," James said. "Tell me about the dancing." Eleanor tried to organize her thoughts through the haze of pain. "Waltzes, quadrilles. My dance instructor said I had natural grace. I wonder what he would think seeing me now." "I think he would say you have more grace than anyone he ever taught," James said quietly. "You have not complained once. You have been braver than most men I know." "I am terrified," Eleanor admitted. "Being brave does not mean not being scared," James said. "It means doing what you have to do even when you are scared." The sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. James pulled the horse to a stop in a small grove of cottonwoods near another stream. "We will camp here for the night," he said. "I know you want to keep going, but the horse needs rest, and traveling in the dark risks a fall that could kill you." He lifted Eleanor down with the same infinite care he had shown all day. She could not stop the whimper that escaped as he laid her on a blanket. "I know," he murmured. "I am sorry. I am so sorry." He built a small fire as the darkness gathered around them. Eleanor watched him move through her pain-blurred vision. He was tall and lean, she could see now, with dark hair that needed cutting and a sun-weathered face that suggested years spent outdoors. His hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of a working man, but they moved with surprising gentleness as he prepared a simple meal. He brought her water, and a little bit of jerky softened in warm water. Eleanor had not thought she could eat, but James insisted. "You need strength," he said, "even if it is just a few bites." After she had managed to swallow a little food, James carefully examined her wound by firelight. She felt his fingers gentle on her back, heard him let out a slow breath. "Still no fresh bleeding," he said. "That is good. How are your legs? Can you feel them?" "Yes," Eleanor said. "They tingle, and they hurt, but differently than my back hurts." "That is good," James said. "That means the bullet has not severed anything vital. If we can get you to a surgeon before infection sets in, you have a real chance." "Thank you," Eleanor said softly, "for doing this. You do not even know me." James was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low. "I could not leave you there, and it is not just because it is the right thing to do. When I saw you lying there on that porch, something in me just knew I had to help you. I cannot explain it better than that." Eleanor felt something warm bloom in her chest, something that had nothing to do with fever or pain. Even through her agony, she was aware of James Cartwright in a way that went beyond gratitude. There was something solid and real about him, something trustworthy. In a world that had suddenly become uncertain and terrifying, he was a fixed point she could hold on to. "Tell me about the ranch in Texas," she said, "the one your father had." James settled down near the fire, close enough that she could see his face in the flickering light. "It was not a big spread," he said. "Maybe 2,000 acres, running about 500 head of cattle. It was hard work, but it was good work. My father taught me everything about ranching, how to read weather, how to judge good grazing land, how to gentle a horse instead of breaking it. He was a good man." "How did he die?" Eleanor asked softly. "Fever," James said. "It swept through one winter, took him and my mother both, within days of each other. I was 18. I tried to keep the ranch going, but there were debts I did not know about. The bank took it all." His voice was matter of fact, but Eleanor could hear the old pain beneath it. "I am sorry," she said. "It was 8 years ago," James said. "I have made my peace with it, but sometimes I think about having a place of my own again. Not just working for someone else, but building something that is mine." "You will," Eleanor said with sudden certainty. "I can tell. You are the kind of man who makes things happen." James looked at her with an expression she could not quite read in the firelight. "You should rest," he said finally. "I will keep watch. If you need anything at all, you tell me." "Will you keep talking?" Eleanor asked. "Your voice helps." When you are talking, I can focus on that instead of the pain. So, James talked. He told her about the cattle drives, about nights sleeping under stars so thick they looked like someone had spilled salt across black velvet. He told her about crossing rivers with thousands of cattle, about dust storms and stampedes, and the satisfaction of delivering a herd safely to the railheads in Kansas. He told her about the men he had worked with, cowboys from every background imaginable, united by their skill with horses and cattle and their willingness to work hard for low pay. Eleanor listened, drifting in and out of consciousness, but always anchored by that steady voice. When the pain became overwhelming, when she wanted to scream or cry or give up, she focused on James Cartwright's voice and held on. The night was long and difficult. Eleanor could not find a comfortable position. Lying on her stomach kept weight off the bullet wound but made her neck and shoulders ache. She dozed fitfully, waking often with gasps of pain. Each time she woke, James was there, offering water, speaking softly, his presence a comfort in the darkness. When dawn finally broke, gray and cool, Eleanor felt as though she had aged years in a single night. Every part of her body hurt, but she was still alive, still conscious, still fighting. "Second day," James said, as he prepared to lift her back onto the horse. "You are doing so well, Eleanor, one day at a time." The second day was harder than the first. The initial shock had worn off, and Eleanor's body was fully aware of the damage it had sustained. Every step the horse took was a fresh torment. She could feel fever building in her body, making her skin hot and her thoughts fuzzy. James stopped frequently to give her water and check the wound, his face growing more concerned as the day wore on. "We are making good time," he told her. "If we can keep this pace, we will reach Cheyenne by tomorrow afternoon." Tomorrow afternoon. It seemed impossibly far away. Eleanor was not sure she could survive another hour, let alone another day and a half. But James's arm was steady around her waist, his voice constant in her ear, and somehow she kept going. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became oppressive. Sweat soaked through Eleanor's clothes. She was desperately thirsty, but drinking too much water made her stomach churn, threatening to add nausea to her list of miseries. "Talk to me," James said. "Tell me what you want to do when you are healed. Tell me about your plans." Eleanor tried to gather her scattered thoughts. "I wanted to teach," she said slowly. "Back in Boston, I was not allowed to work, but I always thought I would be a good teacher. Children need education out here. I thought maybe I could start a school in Deadwood." "You would be a wonderful teacher," James said. "I can tell you are smart. The way you talk, the way you think. Deadwood needs someone like you." "Tell me your dream," Eleanor said. "If you could have anything, what would you want?" James was quiet for a long moment. "A ranch," he finally said. "Not a big one, necessarily. Just enough land to run a few hundred head of cattle. A house that does not leak when it rains. Maybe a wife and children someday. Someone to build a life with." His arm tightened slightly around her waist. "Simple dreams, I suppose." "They are good dreams," Eleanor said. "Everyone deserves a home." The afternoon stretched on endlessly. Eleanor's fever climbed higher, and with it came confusion. Sometimes she thought she was back in Boston, preparing for a ball. Sometimes she thought she was on a ship, the horse's steady movement translating in her fever-addled mind to the rock of waves. James's voice was the only constant, calling her back to reality whenever she drifted too far. "Stay with me, Eleanor," he would say. "We are almost through today. You can do this." When they finally stopped for the second night, Eleanor was barely conscious. James lifted her down, and she heard him swear softly as he examined her wound. "It is getting infected," he said, more to himself than to her. "We need to move faster." "Cannot," Eleanor mumbled. "Hurts too much." "I know," James said, his voice tight with worry. "But if we do not get that bullet out soon, infection is going to kill you faster than the bullet itself." He cleaned the wound as best he could with water and a bottle of whiskey he had in his saddlebags. The alcohol on her raw flesh made Eleanor scream, the sound echoing across the empty plains. She felt James's hand gentle on her head, smoothing back her sweat-damp hair. "I am sorry," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "God, I am so sorry. I hate hurting you." "Not your fault," Eleanor managed to say. "You are saving me." "I am trying," James said, "but it is not enough. You need a doctor, and you need one soon." That night was worse than the first. Eleanor's fever climbed higher, bringing with it nightmares and delirium. She was vaguely aware of James sitting beside her, pressing cool cloths to her forehead, speaking to her in low, urgent tones. Sometimes she thought he was praying. When dawn came, Eleanor could barely rouse herself. Her body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The pain had become a constant roar, no longer sharp, but a deep, all-consuming ache. "Eleanor, you need to wake up," James said, his voice cutting through the fog. "We are leaving now. We are going to ride hard today. I know it is going to hurt like hell, but we do not have a choice. We have to get you to Cheyenne." "I cannot," Eleanor whispered. "James, I cannot do it." "Yes, you can," James said fiercely. He knelt beside her, his face close to hers. She could see the fear and determination in his eyes. "You listen to me, Eleanor Hayes. You are not giving up. Not now. Not after you have come this far. We have one more day, and then you can rest. But you have to hold on." Eleanor wanted to tell him it was impossible, that she had reached her limit, but something in his voice, in his eyes, gave her strength she did not know she had left. She nodded fractionally. "That is my girl," James said softly. "That is my brave girl." He lifted her onto the horse, and this time he did not walk. He pushed the horse into a fast trot, then a canter. Eleanor heard herself screaming, the pain so intense it whited out her vision. The bullet ground against her spine with every stride the horse took. She was going to die. She was certain of it. No one could survive this level of pain. But James's arm was iron around her waist, holding her secure, and his voice was in her ear. "Hold on. Just hold on. We are almost there." Time lost all meaning. There was only pain and motion and James's voice. The sun climbed and fell. The landscape blurred past. Eleanor existed in a space beyond consciousness, beyond thought, held in the world only by the solid presence of the man holding her. When they finally stopped, Eleanor could not process where they were. She heard James shouting, heard other voices responding. There were buildings around them, a town. They had reached a town. "I need a surgeon," James was yelling. "Where is the surgeon?" "Dr. Chen's office 2 streets over," someone responded. "But he might not see her. He is particular about his patients." "He will see her," James said, his voice dangerous. "He will see her, or I will drag him there by his neck." More motion, more pain. Eleanor was lifted, carried. Then she was on a table in a room that smelled of carbolic acid and something else, something medicinal. Bright lights overhead made her squint. A new voice, calm and precise. "What happened?" "Gunshot 3 days ago," James said rapidly. "Bullet lodged near her spine. I brought her from Deadwood as gently as I could, but the wound is infected. She needs surgery now." "3 days," the voice said, not quite disapproving, but concerned. "And you brought her all that way? It is a wonder she is alive." "She is strong," James said. "Please, you have to help her." There was a pause. Eleanor forced her eyes open, saw a Chinese man in a pristine white shirt leaning over her. His eyes were dark and intelligent, his face unreadable. "I will help her," Dr. Chen said. "But you need to leave. This will take some time, and it will not be pleasant to watch." "I am not leaving her," James said flatly. "Doctor." Chen looked at him for a long moment. "Very well. But stay out of my way, and be prepared for the possibility that she may not survive this. The infection is advanced, and operating near the spine is always dangerous." "She will survive," James said with absolute certainty. "She has not come this far to die now." Dr. Chen turned to an assistant. "Prepare the chloroform and get me clean instruments. We are going to be here for a while." Eleanor felt a cloth being pressed over her nose and mouth. The smell was sweet and chemical. Dr. Chen's voice came from far away. "Breathe normally. This will help with the pain." The world began to fade, the edges going soft and dark. The last thing Eleanor was aware of was James's hand gripping hers, solid and warm and real. When she woke, the world was different. The pain was still there, but it had changed. It was sharper now, more localized, but somehow more bearable. She was lying on her stomach on a soft bed, clean white bandages wrapped around her middle. "You are awake," James's voice said, rough with exhaustion and relief. "Thank God. You have been unconscious for almost a full day." Eleanor tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. A moment later, James was there with water, carefully lifting her head so she could drink. "The surgery was successful," James said. "Dr. Chen removed the bullet and cleaned out the infection. He said you are going to recover fully. It will take time, but you will be able to walk again, to live a normal life." Eleanor felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She was going to live. After 3 days of agony, after certain she was going to die, she was going to live. "You saved me," she whispered. "James, you saved my life." "We saved each other," James said quietly. She felt his hand gentle on her hair. "You fought harder than anyone I have ever seen. You never gave up." Over the next few days, Eleanor began the slow process of healing. Dr. Chen visited twice daily to change her bandages and check her progress. He was pleased with how quickly the infection was receding, though he warned that she would need weeks of rest before she could even think about traveling again. James never left her side. He had taken a room in the boarding house next to Dr. Chen's office and spent his days sitting with Eleanor, talking to her, reading to her from newspapers and books he borrowed. At night, he slept in a chair beside her bed, insisting he would not leave her alone. As the pain receded and Eleanor's mind cleared, she found herself increasingly aware of James Cartwright in a way that had nothing to do with gratitude. She noticed the way his hair fell across his forehead when he leaned over to check on her. She noticed the strength in his hands and the gentleness with which he used that strength. She noticed the way he smiled when she said something that amused him, a slow smile that lit up his whole face. And she noticed the way he looked at her when he thought she was sleeping, an expression of such tenderness and concern that it made her heart ache. After a week, Dr. Chen allowed Eleanor to sit up for short periods. After 2 weeks, she was able to stand, leaning heavily on James for support. Her legs were weak from disuse and the injury, but they worked. She could walk. "It is a miracle," Dr. Chen said, shaking his head. "By all rights, that bullet should have paralyzed you or killed you, but it missed the major nerves by a fraction of an inch." "I am lucky," Eleanor said. "You are tough, Doctor," Chen corrected. "And you had good care. This man," he nodded at James, "did everything right. Kept you still, kept the wound clean, got you here as fast as was safe. Most people would have panicked and made it worse." James looked uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what needed doing." As Eleanor recovered, she and James fell into an easy companionship that deepened with each passing day. They talked for hours, sharing stories about their lives before Deadwood, their hopes and dreams for the future. James told her about the ranch he wanted to build, and Eleanor told him about the school she wanted to start. They discovered shared passions for reading and for the beauty of the natural world. They made each other laugh despite the difficult circumstances, and slowly, carefully, they began to acknowledge the deeper feelings growing between them. It started with small things. James's hand lingering on Eleanor's arm when he helped her stand. Eleanor's fingers brushing through James's hair when he dozed in the chair beside her bed. Glances that lasted a moment too long. Words left unspoken, but understood nonetheless. One evening, about 3 weeks after the surgery, Eleanor was sitting up in bed, reading when James returned from an errand. He stopped in the doorway, just looking at her, and something in his expression made Eleanor's breath catch. "What is it?" she asked softly. James came into the room and sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to jostle her. "I have been thinking," he said slowly, "about what happens when you are fully healed, when you do not need me anymore." "I will always need you," Eleanor said, before she could stop herself. James's eyes locked with hers. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low and intense, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me say it all before you respond. Can you do that?" Eleanor nodded, her heart pounding. "I know we have not known each other long," James began. "Not even a month, and I know we met under terrible circumstances. But, Eleanor, these past weeks with you have been the best of my life. When I am with you, everything makes sense. When I listen to you talk, I want to hear every thought you have ever had. When you smile, it is like the sun coming out. And when I thought I might lose you on that ride to Cheyenne, I realized that I had already given you my heart without even meaning to." He took a deep breath. "I am not a rich man. I am just a cowboy with dreams bigger than his wallet. But I am a hard worker, and I am loyal, and I will spend every day trying to make you happy if you will let me. Eleanor Hayes, I am in love with you, and I want to know if there is any chance at all, that you might feel the same way. Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face. "James," she said, her voice breaking, "I fell in love with you when you counted to 3 before moving me onto that blanket. When you apologized for hurting me, even though you were saving my life. When you talked to me for hours just to give me something to focus on besides the pain. I fell in love with your voice and your strength and your gentleness. I fell in love with the way you refused to give up on me. So, yes, I feel the same way. I love you." James made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He leaned forward carefully, mindful of her healing back, and pressed his forehead to hers. "You have made me the happiest man alive," he whispered. "Kiss me," Eleanor said. "Please, James. I have been wanting you to kiss me for weeks." James pulled back just far enough to look into her eyes. "Are you sure? I do not want to hurt you." "You will not hurt me," Eleanor said. "Trust me." So James kissed her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. Eleanor's world, which had narrowed to pain and fear and uncertainty, suddenly expanded into something beautiful and full of possibility. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "What do we do now?" Eleanor asked. "I have no money. You have no money. We are both stuck in Cheyenne with no prospects." "We figure it out together," James said simply. "That is what people in love do. They figure things out." Over the next few weeks, as Eleanor continued to heal, she and James began making plans. James found work as a ranch hand on a spread outside of town, and Eleanor, still too weak for physical labor, took in sewing and mending. The pay was not much, but between them, they could afford a small room and simple meals. Dr. Chen, who had grown fond of his unusual patience, checked on Eleanor weekly. He was pleased with her progress and told her that, within another month or 2, she should be fully healed. "You will always have some stiffness in your back," he told her, "and you should avoid heavy lifting. But otherwise, you should be able to live a normal life. You may even be able to have children, if that is something you want." The bullet did not damage anything vital in that regard. Eleanor and James had not yet discussed marriage explicitly, but the question hung in the air between them, unspoken but understood. They were courting, in the frontier fashion, which meant spending as much time together as propriety and work allowed. James would finish his day at the ranch and come straight to Eleanor's room, bringing her small gifts, wildflowers, or interesting stones, or once, a book of poetry he had traded a day's wages for. They would sit together in the fading light, talking about everything and nothing. James would tell her about his day, about the horses he had worked with, and the cattle he had moved. Eleanor would tell him about the sewing she had done, about the letters she had written to acquaintances back east. They talked about their childhoods, their families, their fears and hopes. And always there was the underlying current of love, growing deeper and stronger with each passing day. One evening in late October, as the air turned crisp and the leaves on the cottonwoods turned gold, James arrived at Eleanor's room with a serious expression on his face. "I need to talk to you about something," he said. Eleanor felt a flutter of nervousness. "What is it?" James sat down beside her and took her hands in his. "The foreman at the ranch where I have been working pulled me aside today. He said there is a small spread about 30 miles south of here that is looking for someone to manage it. The owner lives back east and wants someone trustworthy to run the day-to-day operations. It would come with a small house and a decent salary. Not a fortune, but enough to live on comfortably." Eleanor's heart began to beat faster. "That sounds like an amazing opportunity." "It is," James said. "But Eleanor, I am not going to take it unless you will come with me, as my wife." Eleanor stared at him, her mind spinning. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am," James said. He pulled something from his pocket, a simple gold band. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other for 2 months. But, Eleanor, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to work hard to give you the life you deserve. Will you marry me?" Eleanor did not need to think about it. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, James, I will marry you." James's face broke into the biggest smile Eleanor had ever seen. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made her toes curl. When they finally broke apart, both of them laughing and crying at the same time, Eleanor said, When should we get married?" "As soon as you are well enough," James said. "Dr. Chen said you should be fully healed in another month. What if we planned for late November? That gives us time to arrange everything." "Late November," Eleanor repeated. "That is perfect." The next month passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Eleanor continued to heal, her strength returning day by day. James took the job managing the ranch, riding out each day to begin learning the property and the cattle. He and Eleanor spent their evenings planning their wedding and their future life together. They decided to keep the wedding simple. Neither of them had family in the area, and they had little money for a big celebration. Dr. Chen agreed to stand as a witness, and they found a minister who would perform the ceremony in his small church. Eleanor made her own wedding dress, simple white muslin trimmed with lace she had saved for months to buy. It was not the elaborate gown she might have worn for a Boston society wedding, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. And more importantly, it was hers. On November 28, 1876, Eleanor Hayes married James Cartwright in a small church in Cheyenne, Wyoming territory. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and James kissed her, Eleanor felt joy so pure and complete that it brought tears to her eyes. After the ceremony, Dr. Chen insisted on hosting a small dinner for them at his home. Over roast chicken and vegetables, he toasted the newlyweds. "To James and Eleanor," he said, raising his glass, "who have shown that love can bloom even in the harshest circumstances. May your life together be long and happy." That night, James carried Eleanor over the threshold of a small hotel room he had rented for their wedding night. He set her down gently, always mindful of her back, and cupped her face in his hands. "I love you," he said. "My wife." "I love you," Eleanor replied. "My husband." They spent their wedding night learning each other in the most intimate way, gentle and passionate by turns. Eleanor's back was mostly healed, but James was still careful, always asking if she was comfortable, if anything hurt. His tenderness made Eleanor love him even more. In the morning, they packed their few belongings and rode south to the ranch that would be their new home. The house was small but well built, with 2 rooms and a stone fireplace. It was situated in a valley with a creek running through it, surrounded by rolling grassland perfect for cattle. "It is beautiful," Eleanor breathed, looking at the vista spread before them. "It is ours," James said, his arm around her waist. "Or at least, we get to live here and run it. That is almost as good as owning it." They settled into married life with surprising ease. James worked the ranch from dawn to dusk, and Eleanor kept the house and began to explore the possibility of starting a small school. There were a handful of families scattered across the surrounding ranches, and all of them had children who needed education. By spring, Eleanor had 5 students who came to the house twice a week for lessons. By summer, she had 8. The parents paid what they could, usually in trade, eggs or butter or vegetables, and Eleanor loved the work. Teaching fulfilled something in her that she had not known was missing. James prospered as well. Under his management, the ranch began to turn a better profit. The owner, pleased with the results, gave James a small share of the proceeds. It was not much, but it was a start. A nest egg they could save toward eventually buying their own place. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. The work was hard, money was tight, and the isolation sometimes wore on Eleanor, who had grown up surrounded by people and activity. But, through it all, their love sustained them. On difficult days, they had each other to lean on. On good days, they celebrated together. As their first anniversary approached, Eleanor realized she had missed her monthly courses for 2 months running. She was tired all the time, and nauseous in the mornings. At first she worried that something was wrong with her back, that perhaps infection had returned. But when she mentioned her symptoms to a neighboring ranch wife, the woman laughed. "You are not sick, honey," she said. "You are pregnant." Eleanor was stunned. Dr. Chen had said it was possible, but after everything her body had been through, she had not quite believed it would happen. That evening, when James came in from working the cattle, Eleanor met him at the door with tears in her eyes. "What is wrong?" James asked immediately, concern flooding his face. "Nothing is wrong," Eleanor said, laughing through her tears. "James, we are going to have a baby." The expression on James's face went through several rapid changes. Shock, disbelief, then pure joy. He let out a whoop and picked Eleanor up, spinning her around before remembering himself and setting her down gently. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Are you really sure? I am sure, Eleanor said. I have all the signs. The baby should come sometime in late spring. James pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. A baby, he said wonderingly. Eleanor, we are going to have a baby. Their son was born on May 15th, 1878, after a labor that lasted most of a day and left Eleanor exhausted but triumphant. James, who had insisted on being present despite the neighboring women's protests that it was not proper, held Eleanor's hand through the whole ordeal, whispering encouragement and love. When the baby finally emerged, squalling and red-faced and perfect, James cut the cord with shaking hands. The midwife cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a blanket, then placed him in Eleanor's arms. "Hello, little one," Eleanor whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, my beautiful boy." "What should we name him?" James asked, his voice thick with emotion. Eleanor looked up at her husband, at the man who had saved her life and then made that life worth living. "What was your father's name?" "Samuel," James said. "Samuel Cartwright." "Then we will call him Samuel," Eleanor said. "Samuel James Cartwright, after his father and his grandfather." James leaned down and kissed Eleanor's forehead, then gently touched his son's tiny hand. Baby Samuel immediately gripped his father's finger, and James let out a shaky laugh. "He is perfect," James said. "You are amazing. I love you so much." The first months with a baby were exhausting. Samuel was a healthy, hungry child who demanded feeding every few hours, day and night. Eleanor was constantly tired, and between caring for the baby and keeping house, she had to temporarily close her little school. But she did not mind. Watching James with their son, seeing the gentleness and love with which he held the tiny baby, made everything worthwhile. As Samuel grew from infant to baby to toddler, Eleanor and James's life settled into a comfortable rhythm. James continued to manage the ranch successfully, and Eleanor reopened her school once Samuel was old enough to play quietly while she taught. They were not wealthy, but they were happy and comfortable. When Samuel was 3 years old, Eleanor became pregnant again. Their daughter, whom they named Grace after Eleanor's mother, was born in the winter of 1881. She was a calm, sweet-natured baby, so different from her boisterous brother that Eleanor and James often marveled at how two children from the same parents could be so different. The years passed in a blur of work and family and love. Samuel grew into a sturdy boy who loved horses and following his father around the ranch. Grace was quieter, more studious, with her mother's love of books and learning. Eleanor's school grew to 15 students, and she took pride in watching the children of the frontier learn to read and write and do mathematics. In 1883, the owner of the ranch died, and his heirs, uninterested in keeping property out west, offered to sell it to James at a very fair price. Using their savings and a loan from a Cheyenne bank, James and Eleanor became landowners for the first time. The ranch was theirs, truly theirs, to build on and improve and pass down to their children. James threw himself into improving the property with renewed energy. He built new corrals and a larger barn. He increased the herd size gradually, always careful not to overextend. He treated the few ranch hands he employed fairly, and in return, they worked hard and stayed loyal. Eleanor continued to teach and to raise their children. She also began writing letters to various organizations back east, advocating for more resources for frontier schools. Her efforts eventually resulted in a small grant that allowed her to buy proper textbooks and supplies for her students. One evening in the fall of 1885, Eleanor and James sat on the porch of their house, watching Samuel and Grace play in the yard. Samuel, now 7, was teaching 5-year-old Grace how to rope a fence post. Grace was concentrating fiercely, her little face scrunched up in determination. "Remember when we met?" Eleanor said suddenly. James turned to look at her, a soft smile on his face. "How could I forget? You were lying on that porch with a bullet in your back, and I was terrified you were going to die." "I was terrified too," Eleanor admitted. "But then you started talking to me, and you made me believe I could survive. You gave me hope when I had none." James reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "You gave me hope too," he said. "I did not realize how lost I was until I found you. I had been drifting for 8 years, just moving from job to job, never building anything permanent. And then suddenly, there you were, and I knew you were what I had been looking for all along." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "We have built a good life, Haven, not we?" "The best life," James agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their children play in the golden evening light. Then Grace let out a triumphant shout, having successfully roped the fence post, and Samuel cheered for her. Eleanor and James both laughed. "Should we tell them?" Eleanor asked. "About the baby?" James's smile widened. Eleanor was pregnant with their third child, due to arrive in the spring. "Let us wait a little longer," he said. "Let them have this moment." In March of 1886, Eleanor gave birth to another son. The labor was easier than the previous two, and the baby was healthy and strong. They named him Thomas, after James's grandfather. With 3 children, the house seemed to burst at the seams with life and energy and noise. Samuel, now 8, was a huge help with his younger siblings, and Grace, at 6, was already reading to baby Thomas. The family was chaotic but happy, bound together by love and shared purpose. As the years continued to pass, James and Eleanor watched their children grow and their ranch prosper. They added more land, bought more cattle, built a bigger barn, and eventually added rooms onto the house. They hired more help and began to be recognized as one of the successful ranching families in the area. But success did not change the fundamental dynamic between James and Eleanor. They remained deeply in love, partners in every sense of the word. They made decisions together, supported each other through difficulties, and celebrated successes as a team. On their 10th wedding anniversary, James surprised Eleanor with a trip to Cheyenne, leaving the children in the care of trusted ranch hands. It was their first time away from the children overnight, and Eleanor felt both excited and slightly guilty. "They will be fine," James assured her as they rode toward town, "and we deserve a little time to ourselves." In Cheyenne, James took Eleanor to dinner at the finest restaurant in town. Then they checked into a hotel. As they lay in bed that night, Eleanor traced the scar on James's hand that he had gotten breaking up a fence the previous summer. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, "taking on a woman with a bullet in her back and no prospects?" James captured her hand and brought it to his lips. "Never," he said firmly. "Not for a single second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Eleanor Cartwright. You and our children are my whole world." "I love you," Eleanor said, "more now than even on the day we married. Is that possible? To keep loving someone more and more?" "It must be," James said, pulling her close, "because I feel the same way." They returned to the ranch the next day to find that everything had gone smoothly in their absence. Samuel had helped with the morning chores, Grace had kept Thomas entertained, and the ranch hands had handled everything else. It was a sign of how much their children were growing up. The years of 1887 and 88 brought both triumphs and challenges. A harsh winter in 87 killed some of their cattle, but good management meant the losses were not catastrophic. In the spring of 88, Eleanor's school was officially recognized by the territorial government, which came with a small amount of funding. That summer, Samuel, now 10, began working regularly alongside his father on the ranch, learning the trade that would someday be his. In 1889, Wyoming achieved statehood, and James and Eleanor celebrated with their neighbors at a community gathering. It felt significant, like they were no longer just frontier settlers, but part of something more established and permanent. Eleanor was 36 now, James 39. They had lived through so much together, pain and hardship, joy and success. The bullet scar on Eleanor's back had faded to a thin white line, but it was still there, a permanent reminder of how they had met and how close they had come to never having this life together. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Eleanor would think about that day in Deadwood, about lying on the porch in agony, certain she was going to die. And then she would look around at the life she and James had built, at their children and their home and their land, and feel overwhelming gratitude that she had survived, that James had been there to save her, that they had found each other against all odds. In the fall of 1890, Samuel turned 12 and began talking seriously about what he wanted to do with his life. To James and Eleanor's delight, he announced that he wanted to run the ranch someday, to carry on what his father had built. "But I want to make it even bigger," Samuel said, his eyes shining with ambition. "I want to have the biggest herd in the county, and I want to breed the best horses. People will come from all over to buy Cartwright horses." James smiled and ruffled his son's hair. "Those are good dreams, son, and if you work hard and learn everything you can, I have no doubt you will achieve them." Grace, now 9, announced that she wanted to be a teacher like her mother. She already helped Eleanor with the younger students at the school, reading to them and helping them with their letters. Thomas, at 4, was still too young to know what he wanted, but he showed early signs of being good with animals, spending hours playing with the ranch dogs and bottle-feeding orphaned calves. As the 1890s progressed, the Cartwrights continued to thrive. The ranch grew steadily, and Eleanor's school became one of the best in the region. Former students began coming back to visit, now grown and starting families of their own, crediting Eleanor with giving them the education that had allowed them to succeed. In 1893, James and Eleanor celebrated their 16th anniversary. They were sitting on the porch again, as they had so many times over the years, watching the sun set over the rolling grasslands. "Do you remember our wedding night?" James asked suddenly. Eleanor laughed. "Of course I remember. How could I forget?" "I was so nervous," James admitted. "I wanted everything to be perfect for you, and I was terrified I would do something wrong." "You were perfect," Eleanor said softly. "You have always been perfect for me." James pulled her close, and Eleanor rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and grass and hard work. After all these years, he still made her heart beat faster. She still loved watching him work, loved the sound of his laugh, loved the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. "I hope our children are this happy someday," Eleanor said. "I hope they find what we have." "They will," James said confidently. "We are teaching them well. We are showing them what real love looks like." In 1895, Samuel, now 17, began courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher. Her name was Anna, and she was a sweet, hard-working girl who fit seamlessly into the Cartwright family. Eleanor watched her eldest son fall in love and felt a mixture of joy and poignancy. Her children were growing up, beginning lives of their own. Grace, at 14, was thriving in school and talking about perhaps going to college someday, something that would have been unthinkable for a frontier girl just a generation earlier. Thomas, now 9, was proving to be a natural horseman, with a gentle touch that made even the most skittish animals trust him. James and Eleanor, now in their early 40s, were still healthy and active, though they felt their age more than they once had. James's back ached after long days in the saddle, and Eleanor's old injury bothered her when storms were coming. But they were alive, they were together, and they had built something lasting. One evening in the spring of 1896, Eleanor was cleaning out an old trunk and came across the dress she had worn on the day she was shot. It was folded carefully at the bottom of the trunk, stained with old blood, the bullet hole still visible in the back. She held it up, remembering that day with startling clarity, the heat, the fear, the pain. And James. Always James, his voice steady and sure, his hands gentle, his presence the only thing keeping her tethered to life. "What are you looking at?" James asked, coming into the room. Eleanor turned to him, still holding the dress. "My past," she said. "The day my life changed forever." James came closer, looking at the ruined dress. He reached out and touched the bullet hole gently. "I remember this," he said quietly. "I remember thinking I could not let you die. I remember deciding that I would do whatever it took to save you." "You did save me," Eleanor said. "In every way a person can be saved. You gave me my life back, and then you gave me a life worth living." James took the dress from her and set it aside, then pulled her into his arms. "You saved me too," he said. "I was lost before I met you, just drifting. You gave me purpose and direction. You gave me a home." They stood there holding each other, two people who had been through hell together, and come out the other side stronger and more deeply bonded than either could have imagined. In 1897, Samuel married Anna in a lovely ceremony at the ranch. The whole community came to celebrate, and Eleanor cried happy tears as she watched her son pledge his life to the woman he loved. She and James had bought a small piece of adjacent land and helped Samuel build a house there, so he could start his own family while still working the ranch. Grace finished her formal schooling and began teaching alongside her mother full-time. She had a natural gift for it, patient and creative in her methods. The school continued to grow under their combined leadership. Thomas, at 11, was starting to express interest in breeding horses, just as his older brother had predicted years ago. James began teaching him the finer points of judging horseflesh and choosing which animals to breed for the best results. In January of 1898, Anna gave birth to James and Eleanor's first grandchild, a little girl they named Sarah. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Eleanor was overwhelmed with emotion. This tiny baby was the product of the life she and James had built, the family they had created against all odds. "She is beautiful," Eleanor whispered, tears streaming down her face. James, standing beside her, wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Just like her grandmother," he said. As Sarah grew, more grandchildren followed. Samuel and Anna had 2 more children, a boy named James after his grandfather, and another girl they called Margaret. Grace eventually married a young man who worked at the bank in Cheyenne, and they had 3 children. Even Thomas, the youngest, eventually married and started a family of his own. Through it all, James and Eleanor remained the heart of the family. Their ranch house became the gathering place for holidays and celebrations. Sunday dinners saw 3 generations of Cartwrights crowded around the expanded dining table, laughing and talking and eating Eleanor's cooking. As the new century approached, James and Eleanor, now in their late 40s, began to think about stepping back a bit from the day-to-day work. Samuel had proven himself more than capable of running the ranch, and Grace and her husband were managing the school. It was time for the next generation to take the lead. On New Year's Eve, 1899, the entire Cartwright family gathered at the ranch to celebrate not just the new year, but the new century. As midnight approached, James pulled Eleanor aside, away from the noise and celebration. "Come with me," he said, taking her hand. He led her outside, where the night was clear and cold, the stars brilliant overhead. They walked a little way from the house, to the spot where they could see the whole valley spread before them, the creek glinting in the moonlight. "We did it," James said, gesturing at the vista before them. "Look at what we built, Eleanor. Look at this life." Eleanor looked out at the land that had been their home for over 20 years, at the house glowing with warm light and full of people they loved. She thought about the children and grandchildren inside, about the generations that would come after them, all stemming from that terrible day in Deadwood, when a bullet nearly ended everything. "I never imagined I could be this happy," Eleanor said softly. "When I left Boston, I was looking for something different. I had no idea I would find everything." James turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I love you," he said. "After all these years, after everything we have been through, I love you more than ever. You are my heart, Eleanor Cartwright. You always will be." Eleanor reached up and touched his face, feeling the weathered skin, the lines that had not been there when they met. They had aged together, grown together, built a life together, and she would not change a single moment of it. "I love you too," she said, "forever and always." They kissed as the sounds of celebration rose from the house behind them, as the old century gave way to the new. And in that moment, Eleanor thought about the impossibly young woman she had been, lying on a porch in Deadwood with a bullet in her back, and the scared young cowboy who had refused to let her die. They had saved each other in every way that mattered. As they walked back toward the house, arms around each other, Eleanor felt nothing but gratitude for the strange and beautiful path her life had taken. The bullet scar on her back was still there, a permanent reminder of where it all began, but it no longer represented pain and fear. Instead, it represented survival and strength and the beginning of the greatest love story she could have imagined. Inside the house, surrounded by family and warmth and love, James and Eleanor welcomed the 20th century together. They had lived through so much, hardship and triumph, pain and joy, struggle and success. But through it all, they had each other, and that had made all the difference. The years that followed were gentler. James and Eleanor stepped back from the heaviest work, content to let their children and grandchildren take on the day-to-day responsibilities. They had earned their rest, earned the right to spend their days in each other's company, reminiscing about the past and enjoying the present. They took walks together every evening, weather permitting, still holding hands like newlyweds. They sat on their porch and watched the seasons change. They read books together, discussed current events, told stories to their grandchildren about the old days when Wyoming was still a territory and Deadwood was a wild frontier town. On their 25th anniversary in 1903, their children and grandchildren threw them a huge celebration. People came from all over the region to honor James and Eleanor Cartwright, the couple who had built one of the most successful ranches in the area and who had educated countless children through Eleanor's school. During the celebration, Samuel stood up to make a toast. To my parents, he said, his voice strong and proud, who taught me what it means to work hard, to love deeply, and to never give up, no matter how difficult things get. Everything I am, everything I have, I owe to you. Thank you for showing me what a real partnership looks like. Thank you for building this family. Thank you for being the best parents anyone could ask for. Eleanor, crying happy tears, looked at James and saw that his eyes were wet too. They had done it. They had built this family, this legacy, this life. And it had all started on the worst day of Eleanor's life, when a bullet lodged near her spine and a cowboy refused to let her die. As they grew older, James and Eleanor remained devoted to each other. When James's arthritis made it hard for him to saddle his own horse, Eleanor was there to help. When Eleanor's back ached from her old injury, James would gently massage away the pain. They took care of each other with the same tenderness and dedication they had shown from the very beginning. In the summer of 1908, they celebrated their 30th anniversary. They were now in their mid-50s, grandparents many times over, pillars of their community. The ranch was thriving under Samuel's management, the school was flourishing under Grace's leadership, and Thomas's horse breeding program had become regionally famous. "We have been blessed," Eleanor said to James, as they sat on their porch that evening, watching yet another sunset. "More blessed than I ever thought possible." "We made our own blessings," James replied. "We worked for them, fought for them, built them with our own hands. But yes, we have been blessed, blessed with each other most of all." As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson and purple, James and Eleanor sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, hearts full. They had traveled a long road together, from that day in Deadwood to this moment of perfect peace. The journey had been difficult, painful at times, but also beautiful and rewarding beyond measure. "No regrets?" Eleanor asked softly. "Not a single one," James said firmly. "You?" Eleanor thought about the life she might have had if she had stayed in Boston, if she had never come west, if she had never been shot. It would have been safer, perhaps, more predictable. But it never would have been this rich, this full, this deeply satisfying. "No regrets," she said. "This is exactly the life I was meant to live." And as darkness fell over the Wyoming plains, as stars began to appear in the vast sky above, James and Eleanor Cartwright sat together on the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by the legacy of their love, at peace with the world and with each other. Their story had begun with violence and pain, with a bullet that nearly ended Eleanor's life. But it had become something beautiful, a testament to the power of love, resilience, and the human spirit's capacity for survival and growth. They had started as strangers brought together by tragedy. They had become partners, then lovers, then spouses, then parents and grandparents. They had built a ranch, educated a generation of children, and created a family that would carry on long after they were gone. And through it all, from that first terrible day to this moment of perfect contentment, they had loved each other with a depth and constancy that nothing could shake. It was a love story that had started in the Wild West, in a time and place where life was hard and uncertain, where violence was common and comfort was rare, but it had endured, growing stronger with each passing year, proving that even in the harshest circumstances, love can not only survive, but thrive. As they headed inside for the night, Eleanor paused at the door and looked back at the land they had called home for so many years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to savor. But tonight, she was simply grateful, grateful for the bullet that had brought James into her life, grateful for his strength and gentleness, grateful for every moment they had shared and every moment still to come. "Ready for bed?" James asked, holding out his hand. Eleanor took it, as she had so many times before, and would so many times again. "Ready," she said. And together, as they had done everything for over 30 years, they walked into their home, their sanctuary, the physical embodiment of the life they had built together against all odds. The door closed behind them, shutting out the night, and inside, surrounded by warmth and love and the memories of a lifetime shared, James and Eleanor Cartwright continued their journey together, proof that the greatest love stories are often born from the most unlikely beginnings, and that when two people commit to each other completely, there is nothing they cannot overcome, nothing they cannot build, and nothing that can diminish the power of their bond.